Hey everybody, Jason Ricci here, and this is a little different video than normal. It's not completely out of character for this channel. Sometimes on this channel we talk about serious things, and those are things that I know about, and those are things like mental illness and addiction. So there's been a few videos on both of those subjects. The first one appeared in 2011 or so, called Bipolar Disorder and the Working Musician, which was about how to play music when you feel flatlined on a drug like lithium or other psych medication. So anyway, this isn't completely different. This is an interview here with Tim Jones. Now, the reason this interview came up is because there's a gig this weekend, and it's in Oklahoma, and it's called Inspire Hope and Ignite Change. It's a fundraising concert. And it's this Saturday, September the 28th, from 6 to 9 Central Standard Time. It's at the Will Rogers Theater on Western Avenue in Oklahoma City. You can get your tickets now. I'm putting the link that I'm reading off of right now below the video. Speaking of the video, so what we have in this video is actually a harmonica student of mine named Mr. Tim Jones, who happens to also be an MD, and he is spearheading this concert and trying to raise some money for mental health awareness as well as addiction awareness. And he's hired me, and I'm playing with a local Kansas City artist with Kaitlin, and she's going to be coming and singing, and we're going to do a show, and hopefully we can raise a little money. The following interview also includes our really good friend and author, Anita Schlenk, who is a psychologist who works with all kinds of people who suffer from all kinds of severe problems, in both behavioral and mental and everything. And she is also an author about a book on mental health and blues music, and how mental health has affected and affects musicians. Now, you might be thinking, well, I'm not a professional musician. I don't have any mental health issues. I don't have any addiction issues. If you watch the video, I'm sure you'll find something that you can take out of it that has to do with absolutely all of us. But even if these aren't any problems that affect you, surely they affect a family member or somebody that you know closely. So I'd appreciate you watching. It's a completely unedited video. I've had terrible computer problems this whole week, and it was everything I could do to get Free Friday coming up just really soon. And so this was a last minute addition to the stuff that I wanted to put up, and there was really no time at all to edit it. Here is the completely blank raw footage interview with Mr. Tim Jones, Anita Schlenk, Kaitlin Dibble, and myself. See you there.
Let me introduce everybody now. My name is Tim Jones. I'm the founder of the Mom and Mitchell Foundation, and our mission is to improve mental health outcomes and really reduce the rate of suicide deaths and the deaths from addiction. And joining me is Anita Schlenk. She is a PhD in psychology. She has a practice in Richmond, Virginia, where she deals primarily with incarcerated individuals and therapy with that. But she's also an author of the book called Blues Therapy, and it addresses blues music as a way of introducing therapy, mental health therapy. She has one volume out, and her second edition is coming out soon. And then our guest is Jason Ricci, and his wife Kate is there. And Jason is a professional harmonica player, musician, originally from Portland, Maine. He is also a songwriter, and he's a strong mental health advocate. And that is really how we got hooked up. And so this meeting came together, and I'm going to steal a phrase from Jason, that it starts with me. And the reason I say that is that I have a family history of people taking their own lives. My maternal grandmother took her own life. The reasons of that were not clear to me. She did not have mental health disease, but a bad marriage. My mother was a registered nurse, and she also had bipolar, and then that sort of delved into substance abuse, but she was really manic bipolar primarily. And she took her own life when I was 14. And that was the year lithium was really started to be used as a treatment for mental health disease. And that is important in the way Jason and I actually met. And so I have three generations of people who take their own life. And if you were to think of, maybe it was heart disease or liver cancer or any kind of disease that take your life, you would say, wow, I mean, that's a real problem when every generation is dying from the same disease, and you would deal with it and maybe do some research like you would for any kind of physical health. And so when I started looking in on, well, how does one get involved with that? I looked up the top 100 nonprofits in Forbes, and I was really shocked and surprised there were really none that dealt with mental health per se. The top 10 dealt mainly with physical diseases, heart disease, cancer. There were big medical institutions raising money. And the one that dealt with the mind was Alzheimer's. And with the increasing rate of mental health problems, I just didn't think that just didn't sit with me well. And so the question I have is, why is not mental health more represented, especially in 2024, when we have so many rising problems with anxiety, depression, suicide, mass shootings, addiction. And my experience as a physician over 40 years, I've seen 75,000 to 100,000 patients. If you're paying attention, it becomes pretty clear that we're not doing a good job in mental health. And so that's really my goal, is to try and make some change in that. And to start some kind of foundation, you have to raise money. And initially, I did that. I waited to find a way to do that. I did that using golf for 2 years because my best friend died from COVID, and we were golfers. And I started a program called the Clarence Program, where Clarence Oddbody is the man on It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. He's the angel who's jumped in and saved Clarence, or saved Jimmy Stewart from drowning. And so that's a program about having someone you can talk to, that you can lean on. And we got rained out on our golf tournaments. And then I started thinking, well, I had an experience as a physician. I had one patient in the early 90s who had a devastating injury where he was in a car wreck. He fractured every bone in his face and mandible. He eviscerated his eyes. He was blind, 19-year-old young man, and his brain was fine. And as you might imagine, something like that happens to, he was enraged. I really had trouble talking with him, connecting with him, just because of the anger that he felt. And what I did at that time was, there was REM came out with a CD at that time, and the song Everybody Hurts talks about hanging in there. And I gave that to him, and it was like night and day. It calmed his head down. Our relationship improved, and we continued from that. And so my thought is, how do we use music to help people with mental health? And listening as a student of the harmonica, I was listening to the local KGOU broadcast on NPR. A gentleman named Jim Johnson, Hard Luck Jim, plays weekend blues every weekend, and Jason was played on there, and I listened to the music and I go, wow, that is really great music. And then delving into it, I read Jason's background and history, and it just struck me the compassion and the desire and his thoughts on using music and how that had worked. So I contacted him, told him my story, and asked him if he would help in this goal and adventure of trying to do something with mental health. And that's how we got to today. So that's the abbreviated version of why we're here today. And
That's the abbreviated version, TJ?
That's the abbreviated version. Yeah. So,
okay. I luckily I was taking notes. So yeah.
All right. So let me continue on. Excuse me. I met Anita at the Blues Music Awards this year when you won, I believe it's the 4th Blues Music Award. And sitting at the bar, I just picked up conversation, and we got to talking about why she was there and what she did. And it was divine connection, if you will. And so I thought, we're all in the same lane. This is where I need to go. And I thought she would be a tremendous person to hear from what her experience has been and what her thoughts are on music and mental health. And so with that introduction, I'd like to turn to Anita and ask you some things, Anita. So could you please maybe elaborate a little bit more on what you do professionally?
Hey, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm also a forensic psychologist. So that means I do evaluations for the court, and then I treat criminals, people, mainly sex offenders for most of my career. And then I also have a bit of a side career. I write for Blues Blast magazine too.
Now, how long have you been doing all that?
Well, I've been working in psychology for about 37 years, I think. And writing just about 5, really. I mean, I wrote a lot for journals, psychology journals. I wrote articles, and I had edited this book called The Sexual Predator. It was a 5-volume series. So I've been writing my whole career, but for the first time, something with music was about 5 years ago.
And so how did your interest in the healing effects of music develop?
It started mainly from me noticing that it was my therapy. Working. I worked with people who had been committed as sexually violent predators. It was very. I love the work, but it's very draining, and I found myself getting my therapy from going to hear live music, and I used to say that, like, Beth Hart was my therapist, even though I was a psychologist, going to hear her, she was really my therapist, or other musicians as well.
And tell me a little bit more of how that music gives you mental health, calmness, and therapy.
Well, I think music in general can be healing. If you look at studies, listening to music, it can change your heart rate. It can change, your blood pressure. People who when they play music in surgery rooms, people are supposedly recover quicker. It calms people with Alzheimer's. There's a lot of ways. It activates the brain. We all have chemicals in our brain, and we have some that they kind of call the natural brain opiates that make you feel good, and music can do that. I think blues in particular is really healing for me and for others. Partly because just of the beauty of the tones, the chord progressions that are used, but also the lyrics. There's that raw emotion often to the music, to the lyrics, and you feel like you're not alone listening to what the singer's going through. So I think it's all of that that's therapeutic for me.
When did you meet Jason?
2017, he played in Richmond. That's when I met him.
All right. And you happened to go to a concert that he played at, and
Yeah, he was playing the same night Anders Osborne was playing, and I had tickets to both, and I was going to go see a little of Jason and go to Anders, and I went to hear Jason, and I couldn't leave. I was just transfixed, because he was doing these incredible things with the harmonica that seemed like it was physically impossible to do. He was
must be thick
throwing
overblows.
he was throwing himself into the music, and I remember writing something on Facebook about him. I said he has this charisma that's like Tom Waits mixed with Laurie Anderson mixed with Iggy Pop. I mean, it's like the best of all of them together. I couldn't look away even. It was fantastic.
So when you say music can be therapeutic, how can it be therapeutic for individuals? And can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, I think all the things I mentioned, plus there's kind of a catharsis to hearing the lyrics, to hearing the emotion in the music. A lot of times the songs are about problems, so you feel like you're not alone. A lot of times in blues music, they kind of solve the problem by the end of the song. There's humor in it. There's just there's so many ways that lyrics really touch people. I know a lot of the musicians I talked to said that audience members come up to them later and say that song helped me get through a really hard time, or that song really meant something to me. So that's been a question I've been asking when I interview people for Blues Blast magazine. That's a question I ask a lot, because it's so common that the musicians don't realize how powerful their music really is.
And that really confirms why I think the strategy for using music is so important in what we're doing here. And so you're obviously an accomplished author, and what motivated you to write Blues Therapy?
I really had two goals. The main goal was to try to lessen the stigma. One of the things that really triggered me, I took Anthony Bourdain's death really hard, and I was thinking about how
The culinary,
yeah,
yeah,
the author,
yeah.
and TV personality. He seemed to really enjoy, like, and recognize the small beautiful things in life. So that one really shook me, and I was thinking about that, and Robin Williams, and how many people don't ask for help. And I come across that with my clients a lot, that there's a stigma. They don't want to go on medications because there's a stigma. So I was hoping mainly to kind of lessen the stigma by having these known successful artists talking about, their experience and lessening the stigma that way. And I also wanted to raise money for the Heart Fund, which is part of the Blues Foundation that pays for medical expenses blues musicians can't afford to pay. And I was hoping with the money that we'd raised, we could get them to focus a little more on mental health. And they did start including mental health in their advertising when they talked about the services they reimbursed.
For the Heart Fund, they
Mhm.
didn't used to cover that?
Well, I think they always covered it, but it wasn't always that obvious to people because when you listen to what they covered, you heard medical,
Right.
and not everyone knows that that would cover mental health. So I pointed that out, and I lately I have been hearing them saying that it includes mental health, which is important.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point is that uh, getting health insurance to cover mental health is essential. And that's a good example of that. So when do you plan to release volume two?
I was hoping it would be out already, but there's been a lot of things that have come up, and I'm hoping for the end of the year.
Okay. So if you were to make a significant improvement in mental health outcomes by reducing suicide, deaths from addiction, what do you see as the greatest challenge to doing that? And what do you think would be the most effective strategy?
I really think this perceived stigma is one of the biggest challenges. I mean, I just heard it the other day in group. It's funny how many people will use street drugs, but they're afraid to try medications, and they think there's a
Oh, right.
stigma to it. And when I talk to somebody sometimes about them possibly needing medications or needing therapy, sometimes they say things like, no, I'm smart. Like there's so many myths about mental illness that people, I guess in general people are afraid of what they don't understand. So if we can increase everybody's understanding about it, lessen the stigma, maybe we can reach more people.
That's great. Okay, thank you. All right, Jason, I'm gonna start firing questions at you. Um, I want to start off just thanking you for sharing your struggles with mental health. Um, that means a lot to people, and a lot of people hear what you say, and I just want to compliment you for having the courage to do that. When did it first become apparent to you when you were a teenager that you might have a mental health problem?
Thanks, TJ. I'll jump right in and answer that question in a second, but I just want to say that first of all, that was great, Anita, and that was a fabulous and concise synopsis. And every note that I took on TJ's introduction was basically answered in your comment section, or in your reply. I also want to say that the reason that Kaitlin is here, and we had discussed this, TJ, prior to the call, is that I think it's important to have an outside perspective, not necessarily from somebody involved in medicine or in treating mental illness, but somebody that has to just an innocent bystander, so to speak, that has to be there. So I came from a long history of mental illness on both sides, alcoholism and addiction on both sides of my family, and bipolar disorder on my mother's side of the family. So my mother was institutionalized. I don't even know how many times for long periods of time, where I would go stay with neighbors and cousins, and would have to switch schools and stuff for months at a time. Growing up, there was a psychotic episode that was extremely dramatic, that displaced me and my brother in our teens for a good period of time. So my mother was very forthcoming about the addiction side of the problem, and had warned me and my brother at a very young age that should we ever drink or do drugs, that we were in extreme danger of developing problems. However, and getting to the stigma thing, the mental illness thing was not discussed, right? That was not that was not something that we would talk about. So, the term crazy, right? That's not something that we would discuss. So I started having mental health issues myself as young as 15, with a severe anxiety disorder. So what would happen to me was this, and I have my own theories about this. It's actually not my theory; it's one doctor's theory. But what the symptoms were, this is, I would feel this feeling that my rib cage was too small for my lungs and my heart. And this would go on sometimes for months at a time. And it never let up. And I didn't believe it was psychological at all, because I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning so tired I didn't even know my name, yet I had these symptoms. I had no idea what I was worried about, no idea what I was anxious about, but I couldn't breathe. I didn't believe it at all to be related to mental health or anxiety. I thought I was having a heart attack or something like that. So we, panic attack doesn't suffice, okay, because that would imply a temporary attack that was overwhelming, where you hyperventilated or whatever. This was constant. And this took place for long periods of my life, until I learned how to deal with it and recognize it. But so I was prescribed Valium at 15. So that's what began that. Now, one doctor, though, and this is just a theory, I don't know if it's true, but this one feels really accurate for me. And this may be related to bipolar disorder too. One doctor asked me, when do the anxiety attacks occur? And I said, well, when does this problem happen? And I was like 15 or 16 years old. And I said, well, it's funny enough, doc, it's not during or before a stressful event. It's always after it's over with. And so I think being raised in an environment that was unstable and chaotic, as well as, like, I was in an intense school with intense exams and intense papers that were due. And I would get really, really worked up while I was writing these papers. And then after I would deliver it and get a good grade, then I would have this happen to me, and I'd be down for weeks. And one doctor said that he thought that my body was secreting too much adrenaline, and that what was happening to me was actually a physical response from when the adrenaline stopped, and that my muscles in my chest and my body were so tired from dealing with that. So I think some of that had to do with trauma, and needing that amount of adrenaline to process some of the chaos that was taking place in my home. And it was like a fight or flight thing all the time growing up, constantly growing up. There was constant feeling of that things were going to blow up, that I wouldn't have a place to live, that I was in physical danger, all of those kinds of things. So anyway, around 17 or 18, diagnosed with bipolar disorder, didn't believe it. Right. Didn't think that was the issue. I had plenty of familiarity with what mania looks like. Okay.
Your mom was manic?
Yeah. Now, and funny enough, to this day, she won't admit that. Right. And she watches YouTube. So if we put this on YouTube, she's going to be pissed.
Okay. Okay.
That's one of the reasons that I'm so open about it. Right. It's like, I can't do it anymore. I can't do the hiding thing
Right.
or the keeping up with the Joneses. You know, we grew up in, you know, it's funny because as difficult as my life was on the outside, it was easy. I mean, we were upper middle class, like
Mm.
upper middle class.
Yeah.
And like my name is Ricci, right? So the neighborhood called me Richie Rich, you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But yet when I would go to their houses and their mothers would open the door and go, "Good morning, honey. There's breakfast on the table." I think, "Oh my God, this is what being rich is," right? Like
Yeah.
there's no chaos, right? It's not it's screaming every morning. The first thing I woke up is just chaos, you know, or
Yeah.
nobody there at all, right? Like one or the
Mhm.
other, right? But anyway, you know, so it wasn't until my 30s that bipolar disorder became obvious. Okay. And even then, it wasn't obvious to me. It was obvious to my boyfriend, Brady, at the time. Okay. But it wasn't obvious to me.
And so what is that time period before someone mentioned to you you might be bipolar before you actually saw someone for it and got treated for it?
Been hospitalized many,
Okay.
many times.
Yeah.
I'm currently in therapy.
Right.
Okay. I've seen psychiatrists to go on drugs and nurse practitioners, and I've had regular appointments with them, but I don't know that I've had one of my.
When did you officially come to believe and know that you had bipolar disorder? When did a doctor bring it up?
I think like 33, I was sure, and so were
Okay. So
so was everybody else.
when did someone suggest to you that you might be bipolar and you dismissed it?
That was, I mean, I'd say 15 or so, and then nobody ever suggested it after that.
Until
Like,
you were in your 30s, your early 30s.
yeah, then I started when that was an 8-year relationship with Brady, and when that ended, it ended largely because of symptoms surrounding bipolar disorder, mainly mania.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a humongous cause to the end of that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that, I plunged back into addiction after a 12-year period of complete abstinence and sobriety.
Probably as a result of that.
It was a result of a lot of things, yeah. But I mean, I would say all three sides of the triangle, you know, physical, spiritual, and mental. But all those three things were suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you know, you really have been a serious musician since age 14. I guess you could consider yourself a professional since age 17. And music has really been your entire life. How has playing music changed for you from age 17 to 51? And how has that changed your mental health management?
Well, I would say initially it's been detrimental. Yeah, I mean, the job of music itself is incredibly unstable. There's definitely no health insurance, which is something, you know, when Anita spoke about the Heart Fund and in handling mental health, I know that way before the Heart Fund had made it obvious that they deal with that they did help me. So without organizations like that and everything, I don't know, like it's an incredibly unstable career.
Right.
And not to mention you're surrounded and you know with other mentally ill people and drug addiction and alcoholism and all that kind of stuff too, right? So and then also I would say that that addiction and mental illness are romanticized and often rewarded
Right.
by
Yeah.
the public. And
Yeah.
additionally, even suicide, overdose, and other types of deaths surrounding those two subjects are highly romanticized. And we have the 27 Club and things like this, where, you know, where people who died at 27 years old, right? Like this, you know, this
Oh, right.
mythology, this mythology around it. And we love the term tortured artist and tortured genius. And we celebrate that stuff so much. And I mean, I remember getting my first big article in a blues magazine when I was in my early or late 20s, early 30s. And the guitar player was all about addiction and everything, and going to jail and stuff. And the guitar player in the band said, "Man," he goes, "you know, been at this for 40 years. I've never missed a gig. I've showed up to everything. I've done a fine job my whole life. Where's my article?" You know, so like, we love to talk about it, but we don't like to talk about it in terms of getting better.
Right.
We love to say, like, "Oh, he's he's an addict, or he's crazy, but man, you should hear him play." And you know, and I remember, you know, like people saying, "Oh, like, oh, well, he's great sober, but you should have seen him when he was you know, messed up." You know, so we there's a lot, and it's just not true, right? Like the sober version 99% of the time is better than the drugged up one. But yet we like to put these little fun, you know, things, these like this like it's a movie, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't know. I don't think music is it might be great good for Anita. And you know, look, I do love playing music. I think the act of practicing music is an incredibly rewarding and healing mental health process. I think having a 5 or 10 or 30 or 20 or 40-minute a day regiment of some rudimentary exercises that are not attached to you in any way emotionally is going to make anybody more stable.
So I want to get Kaitlin involved in this. So I think the story of how you guys met is great. Introduced by your mother, and boy, I'd like to meet your mother sometime. She has to be a wonderful person. It's a tough job she does, and she has to see the good in the people she's taking care of. And obviously she did with our boy Jason here. But tell me how that came up with your mom, and how she introduced you guys, and the first date and this kind of stuff.
First date.
Romantic.
um, well, I had been out in Massachusetts making music, and my mom was working an outreach program at a jail in Indiana, which had a bunch of trouble not taking care of their prisoners. So they had given her a block that inmates could go into if they were behaving at a certain level, and then they'd have more freedom. They get GED classes and all sorts of things. AA meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's only if you're good, you get treatment.
well, and
Which is why I couldn't go.
yeah, and it wasn't even really that he was bad. It was that he had gotten into a fight, which had not been started by him.
Right.
But he couldn't get into her cell block, but they kind of connected through that. My mother had found out he played music and knew that I was releasing a CD at that time out in Massachusetts. And she's very charmed by people who are radically honest about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to know what's going on and how people feel. She's not necessarily someone who's going to go try to solve those problems for you, but she's going to hear them out and be very interested. And Jason doesn't usually look for someone to come and solve his problems, but he'll tell you what's going on. So she loves Jason. But, so when Jason got out, my bandmate had a son who was in need of getting some type of music lessons that didn't involve playing guitar. He had gotten into an accident, and he could not play guitar, but he played harmonica, and I knew that about him. So my mother reached out to Jason about giving him some Skype lessons. That kid never got up the nerve to get the Skype lessons, but Jason and I connected on the phone planning it, and we got along great. And I love someone who will tell me what's going on too. But also Jason, I think somewhat from growing up in all this, going through these different ways of understanding his mental illness and working with it, making deals with it, medicating it, not medicating it. He also understands you're going to upset some people sometimes when you are radically honest and when you tell people how you feel. I hadn't experienced that the way that Jason had. And when I released my CD, I felt some hurt from the people around me,
The
not
musical
accepting
community.
the musical community, not accepting me being as honest as
Oh, yeah.
I had dreamed would work out like it would if I were telling my mother about this or me. But Jason was a great person to talk to about this stuff because he has accepted that you're going to upset some people sometimes, and people are going to understand stuff about you when you're radically honest about it, that they might not always love it. That's not the deal. And someone like that really helped me hearing Jason's stories about this. And forget him, I've made people mad and I've made them not mad, and then
Right.
and then
Life
one
goes
day
on.
they'll come back around and you can go, hey, I want to be your friend, or I don't, and either one is fine. And I thought, wait, either one is fine? That's crazy. But Jason knows how to move in a more fluid way, I think, in some ways, because he's had to learn this stuff about the tides of his, uh I don't know, what do you call it? I don't want to say the tides of his mental illness. That's not the right.
It's fine.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Life. Yeah.
So yes, we connected very much through that, and I ended up moving back to Indiana, which you really have to love someone to move to Indiana. A lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
To speak on something that she was talking about with like not being accepted in her community because of being honest about whatever. So I mean, everything isn't for everybody all the time. And I think like that, I don't think that mental health is limited to extreme examples like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, right? Like, for example, just us trying to fit in general and having this expectation that everybody has to like our work or like us is an unrealistic expectation. And it's, increasingly with social media and television and advertising and everything, we're made to think that we need to be happy all the time, that we need to be content all the time, that we need to be physically and mentally and spiritually healthy all the time. And that in and of itself is problematic. Well, I mean, when you listen to Anita talk about the effect that the lyricists have had on her, whether they be in blues or whatever, the whole point of that is that they're not okay, and that's what makes us feel less alone, right? And that feeling isn't going to go across the board to everybody that listens to it, which is what makes it more special when you do develop an audience. So, but I think as musicians, we have this idea that, with that we should have these multiple Grammy awards and that everybody should like us and that there shouldn't be an argument at all. That like with the recent the thing with Taylor Swift where people where people were getting angry at people that didn't like Taylor Swift, right? Like this idea that it's not okay to not like somebody is absurd. It's absolutely absurd, right? Like, you should be able to say, I don't like that, right? Or that doesn't speak to me, but we can't, right? Because this is the epitome, right? We have this epitome of perfection that I think that everybody who pursues music or medicine or anything, any occupation at all, that's the other thing too. We are so defined, especially in the West, by what we do and how well we are doing it. When in reality, right? Like, I have been in better places while I was incarcerated, physically, mentally, and emotionally, than I ever was when I was supposedly at the top of my game and had 40 grand in the bank and was touring the world and was skinny and beautiful, right? But I was a disaster at that time period. I was a complete wreck with bipolar disorder, staying up for 3 or 4 days at a time, right? Sober, right? Like in out of control philosophically with religious and spiritual and theological material, working on harmonicas, for like 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day, practicing 9, 8, 10, completely unhealthy and anorexic, right? A bulimic, and then eventually addiction, all of those types of things. But on the outside, everything was fantastic. But that's not the case. So every morning when I wake up, the first thing I do is meditate. And for me, I've had I've had a real bottom with human power, and this isn't to blame friends or Kaitlin or doctors or medicine. It's just that I've exhausted all of those things until finally I needed a spiritual approach, but which of course was combined, okay, with the mental health regiment, right? I mean, I am on medicine now, right? You might not be able to tell, but
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
but I'm doing really, really well, regulating it. And recently, under supervision, I decided to taper down and try to go off. And it didn't work. And the real win was that I was willing to go back. And the difference between experiencing mania again, okay, for the first time in like really, really raw mania for the first time in a few years, was that I no longer enjoyed that. And that is immense growth. That is completely due to therapy and medication. Completely due to that. I got to experience the new buzz term, the new normal, right? For 5 years. And then I messed with that a little bit and it didn't work out. And I went, holy cats, I'm going back.
So let me just clarify that this recent time where this was just a few months ago that you tapered off and you felt that manic and you didn't like it and you went back on. That's great, really.
5 days. That's how long I lasted.
That's
off the medication.
Huh. Wow.
Before I contacted or before I went back on and then contacted my therapist and said, well, that didn't work.
And I think that's one of the things with the way that music can help with mental health is that somebody who's going to be radically forthright about this stuff also allows for other people going through it to realize there isn't probably going to be an arrival point where you go, oh, look, I found the perfect medication. I found the perfect person. I live in a house like this. I only go to that place.
It doesn't exist.
Perfect. Right? Yeah. But to hear, like, I tried this out, I thought, nah, maybe it didn't work right.
It took years for us, because it's been hard too, to find the right medication for me. Years. And we have a phrase that we use around the house. It was test tube Jason, and we didn't like it. It's derogatory, but it really did describe the difficult process of balancing the medication, because like she was sort of alluded to, certain medications will work at certain periods in your life. And this is the other thing too. So it's so much difficult in treating, say, a broken leg, right? Because there's not but I would imagine even with a broken leg, there are different treatments for different types of breaks, right?
Absolutely, yes.
But it even with addiction, there needs to be different things that can be tried at different times in the addict's life. Okay, so for example, harm reduction may be the only or best approach at a certain period, whereas for another person, complete and total abstinence may be the only thing that could stand in the way. Or for another person, some kind of combination of those two things, or something in the middle. Somebody can still continue to use marijuana successfully, recreationally, whereas another person can't do anything.
Right. Yeah.
And whereas another person has no interest whatsoever in getting sober. And the best thing that we can do is keep them alive, keep them disease free until they get the idea themselves that that's something that they want to do. So there's no across the board treatment for that. And that's what I've had to learn, not only in bipolar disorder, but also in teaching students harmonica.
Mhm.
That every single student has their own groups of strengths and things that they do well and better, whether it's listening, whether it's execution, whether it's rhythm, melody, or harmony, or any three of those things. Certain people display certain advantages and certain deficits, as well as certain advantages in communicating and in again listening. Okay, so these I've had a problem listening my whole life, right? So there is the issue. Okay, so I have to customize the way that I teach harmonica to the way that the student learns and communicates.
Mhm.
So doctors and people that are interested in helping people who are suffering from mental illness or addiction, good ones are also doing the same thing now, where they're customizing treatments or saying, okay, well, we're going to try this, but the patient has to realize that this is a long-term process.
The marathon.
Right. Just I'm just saying what she said in a few words and way too many. Yeah.
No, that was helpful.
Okay. That was excellent. Let me move on to something a little bit lighter. Songwriting. Both of you are songwriters. How does that affect your mental health? Do you use it to as a tool?
I do. It it helps me with hashing out how I actually feel about something, and maybe what my role in a situation could be. Because I know, at least I remember hearing an interview with Bob Dylan where he talked about how basically everybody is him in all of his songs. And I think that's true for all people. So whatever
Mhm.
roles I have people playing, just issues that I have.
Mhm.
Anita mentioned Anders Osborne. So first of all, you should have gone to Anders. You should have left it enough harmonica, right? Anders plays a little harmonica too, right? But anyway, Anders writes every single day, whether he feels like it or not. Okay, so that in and of itself is how you practice any art, right? Regardless of that. But
You talking? He writes as a journal or writes songwriting?
both, I would imagine. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, sometimes
One in the
but one of the things that happens to me when I'm writing songs, and I don't do it nearly as much as I should, is that and the reason I brought up Anders was to preface that Anders says that the reason that he writes every day is so that he doesn't ever imagine a result happening from while he's writing. So he's not writing for the purpose of creating a song that will be recorded that will make people happy and make money. Okay. So that's imperative, because the intent and the motive is therapeutic in and of itself. He's just writing for himself. If it ends up as something that's in a song, that's great. If not, then who cares?
Mhm.
On the other hand, and entirely conversely, when I write songs, I'm very well aware of the fact that I might be singing it in front of other people. So what happens as a result of that is that my bullshit detector starts going off. And so if I write something that is a lie, or that even if it's how I'm feeling, right? And I start looking at it on paper. I then go, time for an important edit here,
Mhm.
right? Because that's not true. So what's really happening? Okay. And then funny enough, I end up in the same place as Anders, right? Where I start now writing
Mhm.
just for me, right?
Right.
But I can't get it out of my head that there might be some kind of an accomplishment here initially.
Mhm.
And then once I get into it, I'm like, same thing with music. I mean, we sit down to practice with the motive of getting better, right? But the real gift is the practice itself.
Right. Yeah.
Getting better is a
Yeah.
byproduct of
Right.
the practice, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
That's what happens when we practice. But the real gift is the time that we spent sussing out the exercise and concentrating on what it is that we're supposed to be doing. That's where the meditative qualities, that's where the loss of self, the loss of interest in self happens, and we start to become completely plugged into the music, which is the whole reason we do this. Everybody I know talks about these feelings where they were on stage and they really didn't feel like they were present for their best shows, right? Like they were just,
Sure.
it
Yeah.
was just happening. It was coming through them, so to speak. Sometimes you hear it really in like almost nauseatingly grandiose terms, like I was a conduit for the divine or something like that. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But but there is something there that happens
Mhm.
when we get out of the way. And I think that's the whole idea. That's what Kate's getting at about being straight up and honest. And I think that Anders writes some very poetic stuff. That's just
Mhm.
absolutely beautiful. And he'd be another one to have maybe another year on this at your thing. Yeah, he's just incredible. And I've been blessed enough lately to be working with him a little bit.
Well, after Anita mentioned his name to me, he's in her book, and I was really struck by the nonprofit he started, which what a great idea. Tell me
Which
the name of
one?
it. It's what the one where
Send
the
me a friend, because
that's it. That's
yeah,
it.
because he's
Yeah.
been involved in a number of other things too.
Yeah.
He's heavily tied in with the Phoenix organization, and also like with a mental health and wellness
Right.
and addiction awareness group out of Salt Lake City. They just
Mhm.
had the Park City Music Summit, which is a 4-day or music festival that features all kinds of workshops that are centered around mental health, addiction,
Mhm.
physical health, and spiritual growth. And
Wonderful.
Anders is the
Yeah.
one that found the people with the money that were ready and willing to donate to that cause. So
What a
yeah, and Send Me a Friend, just for the people watching, is an organization that will send other people that are in recovery from addiction and alcoholism that are doing well to the gigs of musicians who are either playing locally or traveling nationally. So it's really easy. You just go to Send Me a Friend, type in Send Me a Friend program, Send Me a Friend Phoenix organization on Google, and then you email this fella named Bill. It's the email's right there. You just send him your tour schedule. That's all any musician watching has to do. And then they in turn find somebody, and they've almost never failed. Ironically, the only time they couldn't find somebody was in Oklahoma. Ironically, yeah, but they've sent somebody to every single show that I ever played and this has happened multiple times in my life, to just kind of sit with me. And it's not like I was in any, like a lot of times wasn't in any danger of getting loaded or high or intoxicated or whatever you want to call it. It just felt that less the stigma was there. I felt like I had another person
Mhm.
there with
Sure.
me that knew what it was like. And that, you know, instead of the ban, like, oh, well, Jason can't drink, or I shouldn't drink because I'm afraid it's going to upset Jason, or I wonder how Jason's doing, or blah, blah, blah. That's what's going on in my head, even if it's not reality. Right. I'm thinking I'm different. Why am I so screwed up? How come I have a hard time with everything? Why am I experiencing this anxiety? How come I couldn't sleep last night? All of these types of things are going through my head. And then I get a guy there that goes, oh, yeah, I remember what that was like. You know,
So
it gets better. Yeah.
There's where the secret is with music and all of this then is being able to hear somebody say, I know what that's like. And being able to connect. It's a lonely place when you're in the midst of addiction or in the midst of serious untreated mental health issues. But the connection, even with songs like Broken Toy that you did, sometimes it can be too intense, I think, but I know that it has connected Jason with a whole world.
I got some intense fans.
I
get some interesting emails for sure.
Well, so that's a good segue, because I don't know anyone more active on social media than you are, and I say
that's definitely a sign of not doing well in my mental health.
This is a compliment in that you answer everybody who writes you.
I try, not everybody.
Well,
I try.
I haven't seen one that you haven't, because I look on there and it's for years. You've been doing that, what, 17 years? Did that. And I don't know any other artist or person who reaches out to people who reach out to them like you do. And that's just a tremendous asset. And to tell you the truth, that's the whole reason that, I mean, you're sort of at the top of the list of the guests for what we're doing.
Thanks. Thanks. You know, I don't look at it as an asset at all. I look at it as part of my recovery from, is giving back, because, but one of the most what took me so long to get better from addiction is the same thing that I'm going to talk about with mental health is the guilt and the shame were so overwhelming. And it wasn't until I realized that having relapsed after 12 years, having relapsed after 4 years, having multiple relapses in between each of those, that all of that were tools that made me a specialized and honed person that could help other people that had also been through that. Right. And so it wasn't until I could turn some of the negative stuff that all of the stuff that I experienced as a child, the trauma and the chaotic upbringing, that my mother went through that as a child too, that my father went through that as a child too, and that we could take these things if we're honest about them. It sometimes with a degree of levity is necessary. It's important. Yes. It's important to have a little bit of humor, okay, about this stuff too, because that's what's going to reach people. Okay. And it's also going to help ourselves too, right? To have just the tiniest bit of lightheartedness surrounding some of this stuff, because it is so serious, it is so tragic, and it is so sad. But having gone to prison, having having been convicted of something that I didn't do, right, and served a year, that all of the horrible things that I've done and selfish things that I've done to Kaitlin and to my mother, and as rough as those things are, that is my greatest weaponry in reaching somebody that feels as hopeless as I did. And it's funny because I was so willing in every part of the 12-step program to make amends to others. Okay, to forgive others. But I was completely unwilling and entirely unaware that I needed to make the same amends to myself in order to even begin the process of getting better, right? So by answering these emails, right, this is what validates everything that I've been through. Not only that, and this is going to be so hard for people to grasp, but there is a gratitude, an immense gratitude for having been through all of it. There is not only is there not any animosity towards the Department of Corrections for incarcerating me for a year. There's the exact opposite. There's complete and total gratitude.
Saved your life.
There's no animosity towards my mother. There's no animosity towards bipolar disorder or addiction. No, I look at them. Let's be completely straight, right? But again, everybody suffers from some sort of idea that if I get A, B, and C, a car and a job and this amount of money in my background, that then I will be happy, right? So addiction, right, in and of itself is a very microcosm of that problem. If I have another drink, I'll be better. If I have another hit, I'll be better. If I have this, and it doesn't matter what kind of addiction. If I have a boyfriend, if I have a girlfriend, if I have the perfect cocktail of a boyfriend, the right job, this amount of money in my bank account, and 3 drinks on Saturday night, and then I will be happy. This idea that something external will complete ourselves. This is why I've lost interest in human power as my sole resource for getting better, and have had to turn to a greater spiritual solution that, whether it's real or not, regardless of the fact that I totally believe it's real, okay, but even though I came to this through desperation alone, okay, that's it, right? It's just out of options. But even even if it's not real, even if this is just a crazy idea that doesn't work at all, the proof is in the pudding. The daily surrender of I don't know, and please help me, and I'm willing to accept guidance. I want to stay teachable. I want to stay humble. I want to stay honest. I want to persevere. I want to be willing. The willingness, honesty, service, okay, humility. These are the core principles behind every spiritual path. And whether you believe in God or not, there can be no doubt that a life lived serving these principles is surely better. So that's what it's taken for me. Now, I recognize that that's an extreme example, but that I only came to that through addiction, through mental health. So the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if there's somebody out there thinking, oh, my life is so horrible, and it may be much more horrible than your average bear that's next to you. But we have no idea that we as a human race are all suffering from the same problem. And that problem is constantly seeking solutions that are external. That is the what I believe to be the root center of at least of addiction. That's not to take away from the fact that there is legitimate chemical imbalances, that there's been more and more research showing that the addiction and alcoholism is hereditary, and that people are created chemically and physically different. That's not to say that. What I'm saying is that when a blind man loses their eyesight, their hearing gets better. Okay, that we learn different ways of dealing with things, and that we can reframe something that's extremely negative into something that is unbelievably powerful and may even become our purpose in life.
You said that so beautifully. That was really right on. My experience with being with people who have dealt with addiction, unless they find spiritual meaning, they usually don't succeed. And you really said that very well.
I think it takes a combination for some of everything. But if we can start with one, regardless of whatever the subject is willing to start with, that's good. And then we really have to meet people where they're at. That's what it's all about.
Right.
And there's been this big, speaking of social media, there's this huge trend right now of people just being unwilling to meet other people where they're at. whether that be socially or politically or spiritually or otherwise. Okay. And we really just have to be more accepting, more tolerant, and more compassionate. And we need to maintain a sense of humor at all costs.
Yep. Yep. That's so well said, Jason. So I'm going to bring up just a couple other things because we're running a little bit long on time.
We need to get Anita back involved.
Well, what I'd like to do is sort of change over to teenagers struggling. I mean, social media is a big part of that. What advice would you guys have for the younger people struggling with mental health challenges now that some of us older people didn't have to deal with when there wasn't social media 24/7 in your face?
Anita.
I mean, that's a really good question. I was hoping you'd answer it, Jason, because I don't know. I think I really hope that teens would kind of not put so much stuff on social media. You know, it's a whole different world from when we grew up. You know, we don't have to have our biggest mistakes, you know, permanently posted somewhere. So I'm not really sure what to say. What would you say, Jason?
I agree. But I mean, I don't know how to stop that. But I mean, I think one of the problems is that in treating teens that are either suffering from some form of mental illness or addiction or whatever, that it is that, first of all, that their parents are likely suffering from something similar. But even if they're not, they're under the guidance and control of their parents. So getting help can be difficult or deterred. I mean, Anita, just you and me, about 9 months ago, we're dealing with a very similar issue where somebody that we knew wanted help and somebody's parent didn't believe they needed help. Okay. Surrounding stigma, or possibly even the confrontation that them getting help meant that person themselves would have to look at getting help too. Okay, so there's that. So that's I mean, it's an incredibly helpless thing to be, which is a child in a dysfunctional environment. And that's one of the reasons I turned so hard towards academics and school growing up. It was a place I could escape to, where I was able to form relationships with teachers, mostly strong female women, you know, that were, because they were more empathetic than the men. Okay. And more willing to discuss and talk. I had a teacher named Alice Brock, who was, you know, a powerful advocate in my life and was very well aware of what was going on that I could speak to honestly. So I would say that raising awareness in the classroom is going to be important, because this is where these kids spend the majority of their time. So educating kids, we're having a lot of talk now about sexuality, which overall is a good thing. There may be some extremes, you know, that are happening one way or the other, both sides, you know, either, you know, with people who don't want any, and maybe people who want a little too much focus on that. But regardless, like you know, a good friend of mine said the pendulum's going to have to swing a little too far before it can fall back to the middle. And I think that's true. So I think if we could get teachers educated on recognizing the signs of depression, of manic depression, of mania, of suicide, of addiction, of anxiety, and then having more therapists available at school, or having more possible forms of careful intervention. Okay, that where the parents could be included in the conversation in a compassionate manner, and where they say, hey, listen, you know, this is what we're seeing here, and you get, these are the resources that are available. We think it'd be a great idea, because a teacher is not a mental health professional, so they need to defer immediately to somebody in that department, but there has to be that department's availability.
Right.
And that's the problem right now. I mean, the fact that in prison and in the jail systems in the United States, that it is a well-known fact that the majority of people that are incarcerated for some kind of drug or alcohol problem, and additionally are dual diagnosed or the one or the other, okay, with mental health issues as well. Yet, and recidivism seems to be something that everybody's talking about. We don't want to happen in the correctional system, right?
Mhm.
However, there is no money being spent whatsoever, okay, comparatively to the amount of money that is being spent on building supermax prisons where they're incarcerating people in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day and doing anything else. I mean, the sheer becoming incarcerated, going to jail, whether innocent or guilty, every single thing about that system is trauma. Okay, it is unhealthy. All you're going
Seems inhumane.
It is unbelievable. It is the very system itself makes no sense at all. If you don't have enough money to bond out in this country, you will stay in prison, or you will stay in jail, guilty or not, until you have your chance to go to trial. Then, if you're found innocent, there is no form of restitution made for kidnapping you, putting you in a cage where you often had to fight for a Reese's peanut butter cup or the piece of bread on your plate, where you lost your job, you lost your marriage. You're now getting out with or without, whether you were exonerated or found guilty. If you're found guilty, you now have a felony, and now your job opportunities are limited. You have no home. Your wife or your husband has left you. Okay. And you've been beaten up, perhaps raped, held in a cage, confined in solitary confinement, denied medical treatment, coming out with diseases or other kinds of problems. Okay. All of that stuff. Okay, that's what causes the cycle of reoffense.
I mean,
Yeah.
the job that my mother did, she doesn't do anymore because they aren't allowing that back in the jail.
That's
And
unbelievable.
it's
Yeah.
a big problem that if the inmates appreciating what my mother does or did there is what probably got her pushed out of there. No one wants to hear about someone who's making things better for the inmates. And you come out to have excess shame put on you after a really confusing, traumatic experience, or like Jason, you are assaulted and find that means you don't deserve any type of mercy or help while you're there. And that does get off of the subject, though, of what kind of advice we'd have for teenagers. But I think probably the best we could do is to listen to teenagers.
That's it.
When they tell you how they're responding and what they're feeling, and be willing to do it in a non-fearful way. It's one of the things I love with Anita too, is that she has a real way of accepting and hearing what people are saying and kind of allowing the space for uncomfortable negative feelings as well as positive. And it makes you feel safe talking to someone, and it's a huge deal to have someone you feel safe to talk to with.
I've been working recently in Idaho, and I see people from the correction center, and their mental health diagnoses really astounded me. The number they have and the severity of them, and none of that's being addressed. And we see all the homelessness and these issues, and I think this goes back to the point that we need more investment in mental health.
Just as the prisons have privatized, I'm afraid that the only solution is going to be some form of privatized care, like what you're doing now, just raising money and giving that to organizations that are going to intervene. Because when you sit there and you respond by saying something is unbelievable, that this is happening, it is unbelievable, but it's not actually unbelievable when we look at how the incarceration system happens. It's a form of big business. It's absolutely profitable. That we look at a place like Indiana, it has 29 prisons. Okay, last I checked, it might be more now, might be a few less. That has more prisons than the state. The state of California is the only place that has more, and it's quadruple the size. Okay, so why is that? Okay, well, when we look at where these places are, the most of where the towns were the highest in West Virginia and stuff, what we're seeing is that the collapse of some form of industry, whether it was coal or textile or sheet metal or automotive in Detroit or whatever. So what's replaced that, okay, is jobs that are created by building these prisons, by hiring correctional officers to do them, by employing police, by employing public defenders, employing prosecutors and DAs and judges, okay, building courtrooms, having a nurse on staff, okay, all of these types of things are, not to mention the revenue that's created by the prisoners working for pennies every single hour to create things that the state then goes on to sell. Right. So when we look, if we, to use the cliche, if we follow the money, there's no interest at all in correcting recidivism whatsoever. That's just a nice thing to say, is lock them up and, we'll hope they get better. But what the individual needs to internalize is some form of self-empowerment, because even in an environment like that, one can grow. Okay, there are ways, there are books that are available. Okay, and there are other people that might be a little quiet, okay, that are willing to help. Okay, and that even in the worst situation, there are steps that we can take to educate ourselves. There are the simple things: meditation, prayer, yoga, physical well-being, workouts, all of these kinds of things, the 12-step programs, other forms of programs too, besides 12 steps. There's now cognitive behavioral therapy approaches to solving addiction that we see in a program called SMART Recovery, and SMART is an acronym that I can't cite exactly to you right now. There's also Recovery Dharma, which is a Buddha-based but non-dogmatic approach to. So because the 12 steps are primarily spiritual, so there are other options too for people that may have some kind of baggage surrounding that, as we often see, right? Because a lot of people are going to shy away from a spiritual solution because there's some kind of trauma around that, right? Which is completely understandable.
Right. Yeah.
And even though the 12 steps are very clear about a God of your understanding, just using the word God at all is problematic for a ton of people. And in particular, it can even be problematic for people that are too willing to accept it, which are often bipolar and schizophrenic people. Okay. So, it's a double-edged sword, but yeah, it all comes back to really everything that Anita said in her opening monologue right here sums up the entire catalog of our discussion.
I want to make a comment. Since I've known you and I've listened to you talk spiritually about God, I've noticed more of an acceptance that you have in that independence. Over the last 3 years, it just seems to me your realization of that has been great, and I see it.
Well, I think it's important. I think one of the things that's so attractive about Anita, even though she has a PhD, she's sitting here interviewing people, whether they suffer from mental illness or not, with a real genuine interest in their reaction and their opinion. So there's this immense willingness to learn and to validate other people's personal experience. And she's excited by that. Okay, so I get excited by the idea of hearing other people talk about this stuff. So I want to be, what I learned from people like her is be quick to see where people are right. It's really easy to find where people are wrong. And we're all wrong, right? All of us are wrong on something, right? So if we see something working for another person, instead of shooting it down and saying, oh, well, remember the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition, or look at the amount of wars that are started. Well, look
Right.
at the amount of lives that have been changed as
Right.
a result of this. Or if we talk about, oh, well, my son went on medication and they gave him lithium and it really didn't work out for him and it was horrible and now he's dead and it's all because or harm reduction, right? You know, that it's a fact that the harm reduction movement, which is the most exciting and interesting thing that's happening in addiction today, it's exciting and interesting because it's problematic, right? It's not a cut and dry solution. Handing out clean needles to and dope testing kits and providing people with safe places to use.
Right.
I mean, I, as a sober person, have seen people that I'm working with tempted to use because these locations exist, because there is less steps that need to be taken in order to get the dope and use the dope safely. People are relapsing more frequently. However, all right, they're not dying as frequently. That is the most important thing. And I think it's arguable that they're even relapsing more frequently. I just know that they're talking about it. They drive past a harm reduction location and they know they can get the dope safely and use the dope safely. Okay, without going to jail.
Talking about it a good thing?
It is a good thing. It is a good thing. But again, like I say, the pendulum maybe has to swing too far before it can find its middle ground.
Right.
So the key is always communication, always openness, willingness to be wrong, willingness to change, and willingness to see where some parts of a movement, whatever it may be, whether it be medical or spiritual or otherwise, we need to be willing to see where people are right and where something is working and why it's working at that time for this person and maybe not for another.
So you mentioned communicating and openness between family members, and when these kind of behavioral issues come up, it could be divorce, the whole family unit is affected. And I'm speaking personally about my family and what these kind of things do to destroy it. Anita, in your experience, getting people to open up and talk to you, and specifically, I it was always a challenge to get my son to talk with me and to open up about things. You know, people, it's your parents, you know, you never tell your parents what's going on, especially when you're struggling. Any suggestion on how to reach your kids, others who are struggling, to get them to open up?
You know, you're asking me about kids, and that's the one area I've avoided my whole career is working with kids.
Well,
So
or even adults. I mean, everyone's hiding something, and until you know,
I think it's just important to you know, let people know that you're non-judgmental. That's probably been you know, that's probably been what's helped me, I think, work with, you know, some of the people who've been maybe the most hated population, the most marginalized population. You know, they've been able to tell me details about things they've done and open up about what they're going through, because I do think I'm pretty non-judgmental about what they're saying.
well, that would certainly explain talking to one of your children, because you're always judgmental of your children. I mean, do this, don't do that. I mean, sort of part of parenting, but being tolerant too is probably part of that too. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. It's been a great discussion. I appreciate all the honesty and experience you've shared. And I really look forward to having you here in 2 or 3 weeks in Oklahoma City and sharing our music gala with us. And thank you for helping others and helping me. This helps me go from being a victim to a survivor. And isn't that really what it is in life? Developing confidence in yourself, looking at yourself as a survivor, not a victim. And that has been, I'm very appreciative of that.
I'd like to connect that to something Jason was talking about earlier when he was saying he kind of reframed looking at the bad things he was going through because it could help others. I was thinking you're reframing it as it's helping you be a more qualified subject matter expert, really.
And you are, and
I
he
was
is.
thinking the
I
same
mean,
thing.
it's
Yeah.
fantastic, fantastic interview. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, you guys have a great rest of Labor Day, and I'll be in touch.
All right. Look
Thanks.
forward to seeing
Thanks,
you out
TJ.
there.
It will be, we're going to have to talk about some technical things with how you're going to get this video to me to put on my YouTube
Okay,
channel.
you're going to be impressed how I've set this up.
Get some help. Talk to one of your kids.
All right, love you guys. Thanks.
All right. And tell them you need it. Put it in Dropbox and then give them my email and I'll.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Anita, I can't wait. Let's
Hey.
all have dinner together when we get there.
Absolutely.
Okay,
All right.
that'd be great.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
See ya.
All right.
Bye.